Welcome, Nigel. It's fantastic to have you at this summit, albeit virtually, and we'll look forward to another opportunity when we can welcome you in person. I'm coming to you today from Melbourne and from the lands of the Bunurong people of the Kulin Nation, and I pay respects to their elders past and present. And it's just fantastic to be able to have this discussion with you around the topic of equity and inclusion. In this session, really wanting to bring a focus in all that's going on in the world to these really important matters that lie at the heart of some of the change we're trying to make. And I can't think of a better person, you know, in the years that we've come to know one another. To me, it's at the core of who you are and what you do to be driving equity and inclusion. And I wonder if you could talk to us a little bit about that and what does drive you and how you make sense of that in the kind of messiness of what the world is today.
Well, first of all, I'm so pleased to be here. I'm so pleased to see you. I wish I could see everybody else, but I'm sure that will happen, and I'll look forward to that. And actually, to say something about you, Rosemary. I mean, we met maybe one of the first Skull conferences, and maybe 2006, something like that, when nobody had a clue what we were talking about. And I can remember sitting with you and talking, and you and a wonderful woman who called Karen Wilson, who I'm working with now, who has led sustainability impact at the OECD and doing a lot of stuff in her own right. I just think of those days when literally people didn't have a clue what we were talking about. So congratulations to you and all the stamina and resilience that you've shown to take the sector forward. So thank you, Rosemary.
Oh, thank you.
I can go now. I've done my bit. I can go now.
Well, I do. I really appreciate that, and it means a lot coming from you because you are an indefatigable champion of change.
Thank you. So I think about, you know, in terms of what you're talking about, I think I have the advantage of not coming from a financial background, and I think, you know, so everything was possible. Everything is possible. But for me, there's never been a contradiction between business and social change. And so if you look at the big issue, founded by Gordon Ruddock, co-founded with John Bird and Gordon Ruddock, the chair of the Body Shop, Anita Roddick's husband, so we came out of a multinational commercial company that redefined the high street, redefined what shops were all about, and so there was never a contradiction. So when you think, and I've been thinking a lot about Anita Roddick and Gordon recently. If you think in the UK, and I think in Australia as well, and the first franchisee of the big issue in Australia was the first person that launched the big issue in Australia was the head franchisee of the Body Shop. And we had Anita's lorries coming down the street with one side big posters about peppermint foot lotion, and on the other side, things around fair trade and campaigns against domestic violence. And what was happening there was that the Body Shop there was no contradiction between what its values were and what its commercial sale was. And I think, you know, a lot of companies now are embracing that. But and we can look back and look what the Body Shop did in terms of inclusion and equality and justice, and those campaigns, all based around a shop. And so I'm kind of meandering away here, but I think that's the tradition that the Big Issue and Big Issue Invest has.
And you've taken that notion that you can combine these things without, as you say, some of perhaps the preconceptions of people who've come up through certain industries. many people here will know the big issue, and as you said, Australia was one of the first countries outside the UK to adopt it. Fewer people in the audience will be familiar with your work with the big issue Invest, and so it'd be great if you can give people a bit of a window of what led you to translate that perception of business as a force for social good into finance, and some of the things you've been able to do with that.
Well, probably because we didn't have a clue about finance. It was that we were able to have this dream. I mean, the big issue was always about financial inclusion. It was financially included people giving people the ability to earn a living rather than beg or steal or commit crimes. And so when again going back to the Body Shop, when that they invested and put the launch of the big issue, what we wanted to do was replicate what Gordon and the Body Shop had done to finance the launch of the big issue. And we drove and were the pioneers of social enterprise in the UK, and across the globe. There's about 100 and odd replications of the big issue around the world. And what we wanted to do was replicate what had happened to us. So it just seemed that if we were going to extend our mission, if we were going to really look about prevention, which is the core for our mission, is, we're 30 years old this year, the big issue. What we need to make sure that in 30 years' time, there are no vendors. We have to be, it's all about prevention. And when you look at social enterprises, and we thought, John and I worked this out later, I have to say, it felt like the right thing to do was to do this. We had no strategy. It was only after that we realised that actually what we were just doing was extending our mission of prevention, being able to finance other social enterprises and other social businesses in their work around creating change, creating equality, creating justice, creating inclusion, creating change. And that's what we did. And it was interesting because we just looked at it after. And I mean, it sounds like a kind of rock and roll entrepreneurial approach, but I can honestly say the strategy came after.
And yet, from that starting point, you have pioneered some demonstrations of things that people have been saying are barriers to actually achieving more investment that is impactful and for change. And you've brought some of the mainstream players with you. You were the first ones to do a liquid bond fund together with Columbia Threadneedle, going back, 10 years ago.
Yep.
Now. And to put impact management and measurement around that through what you knew from the big issue. You have one of the few social impact bond funds in the world. You have created this platform, the Big Exchange, which truly creates an opportunity for every person, not only the most wealthy or the wholesale investors, to participate. So in that process, you have created so many firsts that show us what's possible. And so I'm interested in how you think about, I guess, what the change is, and the themes that you talked about in terms of enabling people and that process of empowering people and democratization. That what I see, and I'm interested in whether this is accurate from your perspective, is that you're creating more and more opportunities that make it easier for other people, including the mums and dads and people in communities, to invest aligned with their values. Yeah,
I think when we started, I just had this crazy notion that we were going to create a social merchant bank. I hadn't a clue what a merchant bank is. And so I looked it up on Wiki. It just sounded, and I put social in front of whatever it is, and it just seemed to work. It seemed to be what we wanted to create was a place where, if you wanted to be financed as a social business, a social enterprise, and you were looking, it didn't matter whether you're looking for, high risk, money, didn't look, loans, scale up, anything, even grant. This is where you'd come to a Big Issue Invest. And if you were an investor, and it didn't matter whether you wanted to give your money away or put it or get a return of a whatever level, that's the place you came. And so when we started from that with this kind of idea, which everybody says, you can't call it a merchant bank, you can't, because that's awful, and you can't call it a bank because that's compliance and all the rest of it. But when you talk to the social entrepreneurs, they actually got it. They really understood that it was this notion that we were social merchants, and you know, it was really interesting, that divide between the social entrepreneurs and the people coming out of the finance sector, who said we could never use that. So having started from there, we created this swathe of things around. So if you like, it starts with the big issue vendors earning a living, and we have a savings fund for those vendors. Then we had we created something called the rental exchange with Experian, and it was, you know, it was getting people, it was getting people that were renting. They couldn't increase their credit scores even if they'd been renting in social housing and paying their rent on time and so on. And actually it was born, everything was born bottom up. And I think that's the key. I'm wandering off course now, but I'm quite enjoying this, right? So everything was born out of bottom up and our experience, because we were a social enterprise creating a social merchant bank. We were living and breathing being a social enterprise. We understood all the challenges of being a social enterprise and not having a balance sheet and so on and so forth, and like other businesses. And one of our managers' father died, and he was he had been an alcoholic. He'd been a vendor, and when our manager went into his house, he said he wouldn't want to have died like that. Wouldn't have left me and my sister the mess. And when he went in there, there was nothing in there because he couldn't get a credit score, and he wasn't going to go to the money lenders. And so we started to think about that, and we created the rental exchange, which in the end potentially raises the credit scores of about 3.8 million people in social housing. We then went into really early stage lending, and the big issue to always work with corporates, and we brought corporates in and created that. We then created a loan funds where we started, and then we created a limited partner funds to try and scale up social enterprises. So this was just what we did, and suddenly we were looking at anything from really kind of early stage kind of venture, but high risk venture, all the way through to limited partner scale up funds. And it was just because I remember my first chair telling me when I drew it, I honestly drew this out on a 10-minute thing on a train with a terrible hangover from a conference, and thought, I'll do that, I'll just draw it out. And I drew it out, and because I'm dyslexic, it had loads of colours on it. And I remember my chair at the time saying, Nigel, that's very colourful. But actually, it was the blueprint of what we did. And then in 2011, around 12, we'd launched our first limited partner fund in 2010. And I was doing a city lunch thingy, and somebody said to me, why can't the ordinary big issue reader invest in your funds? And of course they couldn't. They weren't sophisticated, they weren't qualified, they weren't, they didn't have their own trusts or foundations, or they weren't high net worth, all the rest of it. And suddenly we realized that's absolutely right. What we wanted to do was allow everybody to be able to invest in the future and save for the future and save for values. And that's why we went down the road of creating these retail liquid funds which anybody could invest in, and that's how we got to Columbia Threadneedle and the bond fund. Actually with a great Australian, I have to say, a guy called Campbell Fleming. And Campbell Fleming was the CEO of Columbia Threadneedle, and really he really just took us under. He got it. He was an amazing guy. He then went to Aberdeen Standard, and we launched funds. We launched a climate solutions fund there, and then him and I dreamt up the big exchange and launched that. So it's all about the democratisation of capital. I've rambled and ranted there, haven't I?
No, but Nigel, it is wonderful to hear your story and the energy that you bring to really fit for purpose finance. How do we use these tools in a way that is moving capital, but also making people's lives better, whether it's directing capital to what they need or helping them engage with the system or enabling them to make better choices. Many of the people in the audience will know that I have been championing things like the rental exchange here. That Fabian and I wrote up a case study. We would love people to pick that up. It's incredibly powerful. And the big exchange is another idea whose time has come. And, I really encourage everyone to take a look. The theme of these summits has been consistently since about the second year, wisdom, courage and action, which really seems to us to sum up some of the characteristics of people who come into impact, but also what's needed to take us forward. And, particularly at this point, do you have any particular advice from your experience in those themes of what you would encourage others, to really take inspiration from what you're saying and how they can see themselves engaging?
Well, actually, something that you said a few minutes ago, even 5 or 10 minutes ago, I lose track of time really. I think the most